All right. Welcome to everyone. Thank you to everyone who's shown up. I'm going to wait just a second for the rest of our hosts to be here, Tony and Alex and SitRep's actual Kyle. So I'm Wyatt Frazier. I'm the other half of SitReps with Kyle. I was a West Point grad, did 5 years as a med service officer in mostly at 425 in the airborne unit up in Alaska. I think now it's like 10th Airborne Corps. Um, but was up in Alaska for almost the entire time I was in the military. Got out, got my MBA at Wharton. Now I am in a lower middle market private equity role at it's a search acquired company if anyone's kind of familiar with that. But for all intents and purposes, I'll just say lower middle market chief of staff role. Did not do consulting myself. I did a lot of the consulting recruiting, so had kind of a very 30,000-foot exposure. But will say, after doing a lot of recruiting now with SitReps, consulting is a fantastic path to go to, as I'm sure our panelists are going to talk about today, because it is a fantastic brand, in my opinion. Many people will instantly recognize it. They know it's a filter, and they know that the skills that you learn there are broadly applicable to a lot of different business sectors. So, definitely something to consider. It is not a job for the faint of heart. It does require travel, does require quite a bit of client services, which, as our panelists will tell you, can be kind of frustrating because you have to deal with clients. So enough from me, considering that I am not a consultant, have never been, and probably won't ever be a consultant in the way that we're talking about tonight. But I'll pass it off first while we wait for other panelists, Tony Woods and Kyle, to Alex Shushunov, who has made a fantastic exit to one of the best companies, I think, in defense tech right now. But I'll let him take it away. So Alex, to you.
Awesome. Thanks. Everyone, Alex Shushunov, super excited to be here. My kind of path, Merchant Marine Academy grad to Army Aviation, went to University of Michigan for grad school for my MBA. Started off my consulting career at Accenture, switched over to McKinsey after about a year. Spent a little over 2 years there, made an exit to product management for an aerospace startup, kind of realized that wasn't the right move. And then about 3 months ago, made the switch to Onebrief. So yeah, excited to talk about a lot of interesting and unique exits from consulting.
Fantastic. Thank you, Alex. Is Tony on? Tony Woods here yet? Or Kyle? Have they gotten here?
Hey, I'm here. Kyle.
Oh, hey, Kyle.
What's up? Hey, everybody. Kyle Eberly, the founder and CEO of SitReps Steercoast. Thank you for joining. We really appreciate it. My path to consulting, like a lot of folks, did the MBA, was initially pursuing investment banking, did an investment banking internship, decided that, with a family, it may not be the best idea. So I decided to go the next, in like tiers of, hardness. I went down, to consulting, which is like number two. I'd say investment banking is number one in tiers of just sheer pain. But, like Wyatt said, there's just such a great, brand builder. You learn some really amazing skills there. So worked at PwC, I think for almost 3 years in their, or maybe it was a little over 3. Don't quite remember, but in what would be called their delivering deal value group, which basically did M&A work. So we would help companies when they're going through, a merger, they're going through an acquisition, they're going through a spinoff, when they're going through, any number of like permutations of M&A. And so we'd help those companies like come together and separate and run their program management offices, give them, playbooks, help them go through, day one events. We'd also do a lot of operational due diligence for private equity buyer or for companies, if they wanted to do some due diligence on their own, business units before they would, they'd go to a buyer. etc. So super interesting. And then after I got kind of tired of doing that during COVID, because for the first like couple of years I was on the road pretty much Monday through Thursday, living in Chicago. And once COVID started, there really wasn't as much travel, and it wasn't as fun. So uh, went over to a defense tech um, consulting company or firm called Acme General Corps. Was working a lot with startups trying to break into the DoD, and also working with the DoD and to interact with startups. Did that for about a year and a half before I came to what is now Google. So can offer like I think a fairly good spectrum of MBA through consulting over to how it ends up in corporate America.
Great. Thank you, Kyle. So I think Tony is running a bit late. He works in the Westmore administration in Maryland. Said he might be a few minutes late, but we'll jump in right now. So I'm guessing from the responses that we got via email, most people watching this are either in the military thinking about what they want to do once they leave, or they're entering their first year of their MBA and they're thinking, what do I do? Most people generally in their first year will default to one of two: investment banking, which we have a fireside chat for that on Thursday, or consulting. So the great question is, what does a consultant actually do? Alex, I'll let you take the first stab at that probably overbroad question.
Yeah, it's a very, very broad question. Honestly, a lot of different things. At McKinsey, for instance, I worked on organizational transformations, growth strategies, operational improvements, you kind of name it, doing commercial due diligences. So it really just depends. Some consultants are kind of specialized in a particular field, whether it's say like operations, implementation, et cetera. But I would say, day to day is a lot of data analysis, building PowerPoints, of course. And it's, just aligning with the client to deliver value fundamentally.
When you talk about also with the PowerPoints, Alex, what is the use case for those PowerPoints? I think that was the question that everyone always asked, was like, what is done? Like, what is the PowerPoint for?
The PowerPoint is essentially to convey like what's the story, like what are we trying to articulate to a particular customer client, like the value, why we need to focus on a certain initiative, something like that. So we'll take a lot of the the data analysis that we do. I know McKinsey, and I think most consulting firms have like really slick tools like ThinkCell, for instance, and we'll kind of package it in a very nice way, very visually appealing, direct and to the point, which just kind of conveys like, hey, this is what needs to be done.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. We'll come back to that in a bit. But Kyle, what would you say consultants do?
Consulting, like the way I describe it to people still in the military is like asking what a consultant does is kind of like saying like, what
we lost you, Kyle.
Okay, can you
We lost you for a
hear me
second.
now?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So asking what a consultant does when I get asked by folks still in the military, it's basically like asking like, what does a soldier do in the army? Because there's many different kinds of consultants, right? There's many different competencies when it comes to consulting. There's still like a base level skill set, but it runs the gamut across pretty much every sector out there. And there's a big difference between what would be called, like, you could have like IT consulting, management consulting, strategy consulting, right? And for example, even though I worked in the M&A group at PwC, that would have not been considered strategy consulting. That was management consulting. We had a strategy consulting arm, right? But it was like two different things. One of them was like, trying to help with more like, operational challenges, acting as an org supplement, and doing due diligences. And the other one would be like more forward looking, like, should we enter a market or validated a commercial opportunity, or is our SKU pricing right? Like stuff like that. And it goes across like so many different like partners at consulting firms will sell work into the most crazy ways, just whatever they think their capabilities they can sell. So it just there's so many different ways to talk about it, and I think like every consultant's story is going to be like a little different, right? Because of like, were they a generalist? They specialize in an industry, right? Were they doing management consulting? Were they doing IT consulting? Were they doing, strategy consulting, et cetera? So I mean, there's just a lot of like different cuts of it.
Yeah. So Alex, back to you. Want to kind of break down into another sort of broad question, but I think informs a lot of people because we talked obviously about travel. We talk about the ways that people do consulting. Could you talk about kind of your day to day? And I'll break that into two pieces. First, probably talk about, you get projects. So
Mhm.
is every single week the exact same? So how do you determine kind of where you're going, what you're traveling to? And then B, like what actually happens from 9 to, whenever the day ends as a consultant?
Yeah, good question. It definitely varies by firm. I'll use McKinsey because I spent most of my time there, but basically for the 2 years and 4 months I was there, I essentially traveled every week. I would say McKinsey indexes a lot more in travel than say some other firms, but what does that look like? So I'd probably get to the airport, get on a flight by 6 or 7 a.m. on a Monday. A lot of times I would travel to New York. Pittsburgh, that area. One study was in Halifax, so that was kind of a hassle to travel. Get on site, say like mid morning, meet with the team, and this is of course assuming that you're staffed on a project. So every day, every morning, we'll have a check-in, kind of understand what are the work streams for the day. We'll kind of divide the team. The team is divided in their individual sort of work streams. We'll have a checkout typically at 5 p.m. And then that's kind of like once we have the checkout, there'll be some do outs for the next morning. So whether you get that work done that evening or you wake up early, the expectation is, for check-in the next morning around 9 a.m., you have everything ready to go. In terms of like what actually happens, it could be data analysis. It could be, walking with the clients, kind of understanding like workflows, a lot of expert interviews that we do to validate certain hypotheses and stuff, building out slides. Yeah, I would say that kind of entails most of the day to day.
Great, Kyle. What would you say that the day to day is or was for you as a consultant?
I mean, I'd say it's pretty similar. I traveled quite a bit, and a lot of consultants live in big cities, so that means they're having to get like up very early to get to the airport. So like that Monday, yeah, 6 or 7 a.m. flight, you're getting up at like 4 in the morning, right? So it's definitely challenging. Sorry, I've got my son in the background here. Take that outside. Um, so but yeah, like kind of similar, right? Like, get there, check in with your team, talk about like, what the goals are, like what work streams, reprioritize, rebalance work as necessary. Um, Usually like there'd be like some client deliverable, right? We're all kind of working towards, or some big event that we're working towards, et cetera. Uh, but it really does depend on like, Alex would say it's a case. We didn't really use like the word case at like PwC, so like the lingo is a little different, but like basically like what client you were on. So and like if you're doing like say like when I was doing like an operational due diligence, that would usually be under like a very tight deal timeline. So like they need to get it done in like the next 2 weeks. So you're now really like tied. You're really now tied to the deal. And because you're tied to the deal, like you just have to kind of work with the deal. So it could mean some like very, very like late days. I mean, in like one instance, like I went like to Orlando taking PTO, and like the partner called and was like freaking out about the state of the due diligence, and like ended up working till like 3 in the morning, and then went to Disney World the next day. Work they did while I was at Disney World with like my family and friends. So, you never know what you're gonna get. And that's what makes it fun, but also makes it challenging. And one other thing, like sometimes I would be at home too, because like I lived in Chicago, and Chicago was a big market for that office specifically. So you could end up doing you could end up working, like I worked when GE healthcare was going through their spinoff. Like I worked there and it's like go to their Chicago office every day. So, so that was actually pretty chill. But it really does depend. Like it depends on like what assignment you're on or case or study or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, no, great
But
summaries. One question for you, Alex. People talk about, I don't know if you called it this at McKinsey. I know this from, group chats where my business school friends are consultants. What happens when you're not I guess better question is this. How do you get onto a project? So you show up at the firm and my friends at the firm are like, there's a new recruiting that happens. You don't just show up and like every day go to work and they're just like, all right, Alex, you have your project. Here you go. Could you describe kind of how you actually get work once you are at a consulting firm?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll kind of describe it from the lens of Accenture and then McKinsey because they are a little bit different. When I was at Accenture, there was very much a push on chargeability, usability. It's essentially like how many days you're actually assigned to client work over like the days of the year. A lot of that was just, cheeks to seats. Like they just take people, put them in wherever available. At McKinsey, you would have a professional development manager. So say if like, for me, I come from a aviation background. I really want to work in aerospace and defense. You will work with your PD manager and they'll kind of help get you staffed on certain projects or stuff that's interesting to you. Think of like consulting firms as, a conglomerate of a bunch of little practices, like a bunch of little companies, so say if it's, aerospace and defense, you have different like verticals, different practices. If you're aerospace and defense, you're not going to be working with folks from, healthcare, for instance, or financial services. So the staffing becomes very much like a relationship game, like there's certain mechanisms at McKinsey. A lot of it does entail outreach. So connecting with partners, connecting with different teams, looking at what's available. And it's almost like, I don't want to say if you like apply, but you'd be like, hey, kind of like pitch yourself. Like I have these skills. This is my background. I'd love to work in this project. Sometimes you need to do some BD work to kind of like get bought in, kind of show that you're committed and whatnot. But yeah, it varies. And then when you're not staffed, it's called like just being, you're on the beach or on the bench. And normally then in that case, you're doing some either recruiting or business development work, working on pitch decks, etc. So hopefully that kind of answers the question a bit.
Yeah. Was the beach more chill at McKinsey? I mean, what was your kind of work style like? My friends seem to enjoy the beach, but it's kind of a double-edged sword, right?
Yeah, I mean, generally speaking, like I wasn't really staffed on any sort of like, any sort of like BD efforts. So like my beach time, it wasn't extensive, but to have like a week or two of downtime between projects is kind of nice where there's like no major expectations of you. Sometimes you get looped in, hey, can you lean into this, or help with some recruiting events and stuff like that. But generally pretty chill between projects.
Great. Kyle, you want to talk about PwC's staffing model, how you find work, keep work, what's it like between projects?
yeah, I mean it's similar, as one might expect. When you first get to the firm, right, as like a new MBA grad, they pretty much just staff you on a project, just to get you started because. So, like what Alex said, consulting firms are basically collections of partners, right, who have their own little businesses. I call it like decentralized anarchy. And so they, partners, staff who they want on these on these projects. So you would have um, something similar. It was you had what was called like a relationship manager and a coach, right? And like the relationship manager was there to, basically like be administratively like in charge of you and like help you kind of like find work and stuff. And so, sorry, my son's in the background. So the and so like initially that person would like, help you find work, connect you with the staffer, kind of like get to know you and everything. And then as you would like grow within the firm, right, you would start to meet other partners and other directors and or managers who had like staffing, authority, right? And were looking to staff their projects. And you would start to make connections and networks. And those people would then start to call you, right? And it doesn't take very long for that to happen. Like if you're like if like after the first 6 months or a year and you're like decent, like you're gonna start to get calls from people to say, hey, come work with me again and again and again. And that's how you survive and thrive in a consulting firm, is you basically have to build these relationships and get brought into these pods where you'll get assigned work, and people who like will look out for you and like go to bat for you, like end of year reviews and shit. So it's yeah, but like you do have to direct your own career, right? And be like, and like you can turn down work. Like people can come to, like, I've turned down work before and be like, no, I don't want to do that. It's because the manager, or I don't like the partner, or I don't like the work, or I don't want to travel there, or it doesn't work for me, right? Because like as long as you like have like, and you would go tell somebody like your relationship manager and be like, look, I don't want to do this and I'm going to turn it down. And like double check that they're cool with that. But they're there to like, they want, they turnover is like such a big thing at consulting firms, that they do kind of want to try and keep you happy as long as you're performing. So like you turn down work, right? But you also have to like keep, like Alex said, what would be called your utilization number up, right? So and like I think for like PwC it was like 80% for like senior associates or something. So it was like if you knew you were good for that or on track for it or whatever, right? Like say you had like burned hot and you knew you could like cool down, like say you hit like 86% utilization and you're like, okay, like I think I'm good for like a couple weeks. I can burn like 80 hours or something. That was always like, it was kind of a game you play. You just got to understand like where you stand with the firm and like your political capital too, like and how you get assigned to projects. It's all so touchy feely. It's probably the best way to describe it.
Yeah. Well, hey, we have a new guest. Tony Woods is here after saving lives at the VA. Tony, you want to introduce yourself and then jump into maybe telling us a little bit about you were at BCG, so good new perspective, but kind of talking to how you find success once you actually get into consulting.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a pleasure to be here. Wyatt, thanks for inviting me. Alex and Kyle, it's good sort of hearing your perspectives. It's very, very consistent with my experience at BCG. I was there for a little over 3 years, left the firm as a project leader too, so similar to an engagement manager at McKinsey. Um, uh, could not think of a better training ground for myself. I think for veterans, it was just an absolutely incredible experience that unlike most jobs, it's something that I think I turn to that skill set every single day in some way, shape, or form at every single job I've had since. So I'd certainly say that. My time there, I've mostly focused on public sector. I started off on a facilities management company, did some private equity work, did a post-merger integration, but multiple long stints doing some public sector work as BCG was standing up its federal practice and doing their best to play catch up with McKinsey in that area. So great experience. It is absolutely a grind. I think Alex's description about sort of time on the bench is exactly the same. I think my twist on that, or my take on that, is you are starting to, by the time you've been there a little bit of time, working with constellations of partner who are going to be the ones who hopefully sort of pull you forward and advocate for you behind the scenes. And so that was always a time that I would spend just doing that business development work, being useful to those you hope are gonna take care of you. Wyatt, I'm forgetting the exact question. Would you mind
Just ask what once you actually get in, and we'll kind of jump backwards after this question, but I think it's
Sure.
relevant to where people are talking. How do you find what defines success? You talked about getting promoted, and I frankly would hear kids when I was at Wharton talk about consulting, and they'd be like, I'll decide if I want to stay and make partner. And it was kind of funny because people that were actually in were like, you don't get to decide. It's not like, would
Yeah.
you like to be a partner? It's
Yeah.
actually incredibly competitive, and attrition does not only come voluntarily. So would love to kind of hear your take on what actually determines success and
Yeah, that's exactly
how you.
right. Yeah. So I think, Kyle's point, I think is actually right. You've got to always have a pretty keen sense of your own performance. And unlike most environments, you are constantly being reminded of your performance. With every case that you complete, you're walking away with new grades. And you have a performance coach who's sort of always helping to calibrate where you fit it relative to your peers at all times. And so, in some sense, that's a good thing, right? You have you know where you stand, but if things aren't going perfectly, you're also kind of constantly feeling evaluated. So it is something that you need to be prepared from an emotional standpoint to always be judged, to always be evaluated, to always to always have your flaws pointed out. So the next case that you go on, they can put you on a module that is designed to make you better at the thing you're bad at, right? So you're always kind of navigating that kind of performance angle, which is tough. But knowing that in some sense it's a game, that this is designed to make you better, that this is only going to help you continue to be allowed to stay at the firm is kind of the mindset that you have to go into it with, and then you keep on trucking. I do think once you've kind of crossed the hurdle from, in the case of BCG, from consultant to project leader, there's a marked shift in how you start to be treated. You are now on the management side, and it really does start to change. So in some sense, the firm has said, look, we think you're really good and we think you ought to stay and we want you to be successful. But again, it's a tiny pyramid at the top, and being able to have longevity is hard. And so you're constantly trying to reinvent yourself. You're constantly trying to prove yourself. You're not turning down work. You are working hard and finding time to add to the firm and add to your constellation of partners by contributing to business development. And so it really is, there's kind of never turning down work. Having an unhealthy work-life balance is kind of the name of the game. And if you're fortunate, if the business is going well, your constellation of partners are doing well, then you get to stay and hopefully make partners someday.
Awesome.
Which by the way, can occur quicker than you might think. Like, if there's one thing I think everybody should understand about consulting, it's that you can get promoted very quickly compared to life at a corporate firm. And if you're good, you can move up very quickly, and eventually make partner probably under 10 years, which partners make like over, depending on the practice, right? But like, it's not uncommon for partners to make over $1 million a year. So like, you have like a clear path to that, which is like I think people need to understand like what's at the end of the rainbow. It's making a shit ton of money using leverage, which is basically more junior consultants. So that is why everybody kills themselves in this profession, in addition to the exit opportunities.
Yeah. Alex, do you want to finish this up? Then we'll go into recruiting, because that's probably what everyone's wondering, how you actually get in.
The question is just about how to be successful. And
yeah. What traits does it take? How do you get promoted? What do you see from people that actually get to that partner level?
Yeah. I know this has been kind of echoed already, but consistency. So like consulting, like people kind of bounce around, or there's an opportunity to bounce around. They call it, doing a random walk or generalist. And there was one vet partner in the Chicago office, and he kind of like, during some professional development session, he was like, that's all bullshit. He's like, what makes people succeed is showing up, proving yourself on a particular study, and then essentially being invited by that partner for the next thing. That's something that I wish I learned a little bit earlier. I thought like, okay, I'm just going to do a little bit of everything. but the people that succeed are the ones that essentially stick with that leadership team and just follow them through. Those are the types of people that are going to pound the table for you when it comes time for promotions, designations, etc. Right? Like think of it as like, you're a staff officer, you're on a staff for, I don't know, a year or something. You'll get like a decent OER, but like the people that have stuck around a little bit longer, like they're going to get a stronger OER or fit rep for the Navy folks. So yeah, being with, sticking around with leadership, I think is a awesome way to differentiate yourself and to succeed in any consulting firm.
Right, great. And by the way, totally off topic, but I did put Alex's coaching link in the chat. If anyone is listening to him and says, I would love to get some advice, his time is well worth it. He will answer one-off questions via DM or via free booking link, but that's cool. Made the hearts go. Great product feature there from Zoom. But it's definitely worth it, I think, to get some help beyond just the free stuff that you get by casing, which kind of gets into the next topic. We'll go back to you, Tony. What defines success? Because I think it's interesting. Tony and Alex, you both recruited for consulting multiple times. What helps? What does it take to actually succeed and get into a consulting firm? Tony, maybe you go.
Yeah, I applied once coming out of a program called the White House Fellowship. And, I sort of like, hey, this is a great job. It's a great firm. I've heard wonderful things about these places. I'd love to. I had not worked in the private sector yet. And so I was sort of thinking this would be a great chance to do that. I would say my failing that first go was approach to the case interview sort of method. I thought, I'll practice a few cases and then I'll ask as many people as I possibly can to do a practice case with me. And as a Black gay veteran, there was no shortage of like affinity groups at BCG who were willing to help you out and offer a person or two to give you a case interview. And so my advice to folks, and I'll get into sort of what I did differently the second time, but my advice to folks is to be really sparing about or mindful about how you leverage practice interviews with actual consultants at these firms. If you do 12 interviews, you might get 12 pieces of feedback that are all somewhat different, and it can kind of cause you to chase your tail. When I went about it the second time, I realized the onus is really on me to do a tremendous amount of work. And so I was probably doing 3 to 5 cases a day on my own. I would walk down the street like Rain Man and multiply that license plate times that license plate. I'm going to divide the time of day by, the stock ticker I'm looking at. You kind of have to live in math and live in cases and then be very strategic about, okay, I've got a practice case. I'm going to take it very seriously. I'm going to get that really strategic feedback. And then I'm going to practice 10 more cases to focus on that feedback. And so it really does take a lot more diligence on your own part and probably about maybe 4 or 5 solid practice cases. But it took me 2 solid months of prep to really nail the interviews. And then by the time they came around, it felt smooth. And so I really would just sort of put that, let folks know. I mean, get all the case books from all the other MBA, sort of MBA programs. They're out there. Print them out. You can actually simulate good casing on your own and be creative and find the tricks and all those types of things. And then, have those 4 to 5 really good practice cases that are live. And that personally worked for me. But I'd be curious what sort of folks like Alex or Kyle's experience was.
Yeah. By the way, Tony, I'm glad you did the humble brag of I came out of this little thing called the White House, called working in the Obama administration.
Well, it didn't prepare me for BCG, so.
Well, it's still a great humble brag. Alex,
Thank you.
You coach a lot of people. Like I said, you have one of my buddies literally tried 3 times to get into McKinsey, never was. Alex helped him out quite a bit and
Seal the deal, yeah.
Seal the deal. So what is the secret sauce, Alex?
Well, I'd kind of even back up, like think of it as like two parts. Like, how do you get the interview, and then how do you crush the interview? So in terms of getting the interview, demonstrating high levels of academic achievements, obviously that's why a lot of consulting firms recruit from target programs. Having those high test scores. With that being said, I had a 670 GMAT score. I guess like the OG GMAT. I think it was about like 80th percentile. So nothing that was considered like super stellar. But having a good resume too, right? Like showing a good kind of expansive, comprehensive list of skills, right? You don't want to just have a resume that's like, commanded this, managed some, responsible for this $10 million property book. Talk about like the value created, any sort of data analysis, analytics, process improvement that you did. And then when it comes time, so like once you do get the interview, to Tony's point, like you got to deliver, you got a case. I was in Michigan, as part of the consulting club, so we had a fairly structured kind of case interview prep process, with classmates and stuff, and support from MBA twos. The thing I would say with casing, and I stand by this, there can be a point where you case too much, because then you start trying to fit a business prompt or a framework where say it's profitability and stuff, and you start defaulting to those, and I've seen it on interviews where people try to fit a square peg in a round hole and it doesn't really fit. McKinsey's a very unique beast. Their frameworks are all bespoke to the case, so you're probably not going to see a traditional framework about profitability or growth. But case, like you got to learn how to case. As Tony alluded to, lots of good resources out there. Most business school programs have case books. Working with your peers and stuff to practice casing, and like you said, Tony, like be very deliberate if you are going to case with current consultants. Just be very respectful of their time and come prepared, because some of those even mock cases are a little bit evaluatory. Some of the feedback can go back to the recruiting team. It's like, hey, yeah, this guy is just like hot garbage. I don't know if if we want to like actually invite him to interview and stuff. So come prepared and just be, bring your A game.
Great. Kyle, you want to round this off?
Hey, sorry. Yeah, so I entered through the MBA route. So it's actually super interesting to hear Tommy and Alex's how they got in, because it was different than how I got in, right? I came in through the MBA route, and the MBA route is very like it's a very structured process, right? In the sense that like consulting firms get there very early, and start having conversations with people, and like inviting people out to happy hours or taking them out to dinner or whatever, just starting to get to know people. And they'll usually do like a presentation, right? And then they'll talk to more people, and then like they'll be like filtering through resumes and everything. I've done this because I've been on the recruiting team. And so like filtering through resumes and picking, okay, I remember this guy, I like this guy. And so you're like, the goal of all this networking is create a positive impression, right? And to kind of get networked up enough around the people that come to the school, right? That when they go to, review the resumes, they're like, yeah, this guy. Which is, an interesting experience to go through, because in the schools will even like train you how to do this. They'll be like, you're going to go to these networking events and everybody's going to be standing there and they're all going to form a half moon. Here's how to like introduce yourself, enter into a conversation, say something good. You listen and then leave, and then go to the next person and the next, and like that's literally what they instruct you to do and teach you how to do it. It's a good networking skill to be able to enter and leave conversations easily. And then they'll do the case, then they'll pick who they want to move forward, and they'll do the casing and the case interviews and everything. And you usually prepare at the consulting club and practice casing. What I recommend, which is like, I think is now a super powerful tool, is you could use AI to basically case yourself. Like go find you go find like a case online. Like a bunch of the consulting firms literally have them on their website. Feed it into ChatGPT and it was like, case me like I'm in an interview, and you could practice that way. But there are frameworks you should learn about how like you could deconstruct a problem. which is like part of what you learn in casing preparation. So if somebody presents you essentially like an unstructured problem, you have a way to structure it with a framework and, kind of categorize and like answers and everything and be able to present analysis, kind of on the spot and look at it. And that's like a skill they look for as well. Really, they want to see how you can think. And if you're going to be able to think on your feet, because that's the sort of job this is. And then you'll have like an interview with like the partner that would be high level. So, and then what's interesting is after you get the offer, then they start trying to sell you, take the offer, and that's a whole other like wine to dine and go party. It's like being pressed into the Navy. If the Navy was full of like a bunch of highly paid, smart people.
So one question I think a lot of people have as they get into the consulting game, Tony, Alex, Kyle, you've all been on the other side as recruiters because the consultants, literally when I was at Wharton, there was people that were emailing, there was like a Wharton Vets alum that would email the club and be like, hey, I'm from McKinsey. I'm here in the Philly office. I'm on the beach for like the next month. And literally my job is to recruit vets at Wharton into consulting for McKinsey. And that was like their full-time job. And then on top of that, McKinsey had a person who was like their 4-month project just to literally like live at the Four Seasons in Philly and recruit. It was crazy. Like the amount of money that they were spending in salary, accommodations, dining, everything. A lot of people would always, and of course their emails would always say, hey, book a coffee chat with me. It's non-evaluative. During these kind of behavioral-ish type interviews and these dinners and everything, what should people know as they go forward? Because I think that people get really nervous. There's a lot of conflicting advice. Alex, we'll start with you and then go from there.
Yeah, I would say when it comes to like coffee chats and stuff, generally, like, I mean, they're evaluative, but only if you do something like say something like really off-hinged or like, clearly like you're not a good fit. I would say generally it's going to be, good feedback unless you say something that's just like truly horrific, which has happened before. But when it comes to coffee chats, I think the first thing is just like being respectful of the person's time, especially for a lot of coffee chats. I would take them between, while I'm staff. So might be a little bit tired if I'm showing up to a campus recruiting event, I just traveled in from somewhere. Don't play stump the chump. Like people love doing that, coming with some like super complicated question, keep it a little more like lighthearted. Don't go up to like a McKinsey person and, ask them like, hey, like, what are your thoughts about the whole like, Purdue Pharma, like opioid settlements? Like probably not a good, conversation starter. But, keep it like, hey, like tell me about like a super memorable or, a memorable study or consulting project you've been on this year. What did you like about it? What did you not like about it? Your career goals and stuff. If you're trying to get in some kind of like philosophical economic debate or something, like that's not the approach you want to take. I've seen it and it's just like, are you fucking kidding me? Come on, dude. Like, let's just chill out. Excuse my language. I'll turn it over to Tony.
Don't talking about messing with our meal ticket.
Tony, what do you think?
No, I completely agree with Alex. I think my advice to everyone here would be to be empathetic of the situation that they are probably in. You were one of 10 to 20 conversations that day. So one, don't be a jerk with the types of questions you ask. Try to have an interesting conversation. I would say it's a lot like dating, probably, just try to have an interesting, entertaining conversation without doing something to knock yourself out of the running, but be memorable, have a smart, interesting conversation, show that you care about these topics and you are, enthusiastic about the firm and the work. And I think that certainly does go a long way. One thing I would say on the flip side, let's say this all works out, I think most, if not everyone on this call is a veteran. So you'll start to find yourself associated with these sort of internal affinity groups. Like I mentioned, I was a part of 3 of them. it can become a hidden tax on your time, right? Because you are the ones who are going to pay it forward and help other veterans, practice case interviews. You are going to be the one who's asked to, on a Thursday, fly to this, to HBS to fill in the room because it's veteran recruiting night. And so you're going to have a fancy dinner in Boston, but but these types of things do take away from your ability to be successful on your study or your case. And so be mindful of that, of the role that you play in recruiting, when you do get to the other side, because it is a pretty significant burden on your time.
Yeah, and they only really want to make sure you the most important number to hit is your billable hours. Like it's the most important number to hit. So, which is why like when you get forced to do this like internal development stuff, it's like, oh, this is fun, but it's also really annoying. Like now I'm like having to chat with all these people, etc. I think just be brief, brilliant, and gone. Just be like a normal person. Like a big test is like, would I want to spend more time with this person? Just like Tommy said, it's kind of like dating. So, try to talk to them about things other than work, and then like weave in and out of like talking about work and, learn more about like what interests them and like, what's the most interesting thing they're working on right now, et cetera, et cetera. You're just trying to like hot start, like some sort of spark. So that person is like, okay, yeah, this guy had it. We should talk to him more. And having been on the other side of it and talking to people, yeah, you kind of just know, right? And you're like, okay, like I enjoy this conversation. I can see myself spending more time with this person. They're clearly have a good head on their shoulder. They're smart. They have an interesting background. Sure, let's move them forward.
Yeah, it's great advice. Like, not just for consulting, having now placed dozens and dozens of vets in jobs and working with clients, the amount of people that are like, yeah, Tony, Alex, Kyle, like whoever, they're technically fine, but man, like we really want to work with them. Tony actually referred us someone who is an all-star, and the company that we referred them to is consistently trying to figure out ways to put her in a role because they're like, we just like this person. Like, yeah, she's got the experience, but it's not the experience necessarily. And they're like, we are figuring out within our company how we can fit this person in. Just being a likable person and the opposite. We've had people that are incredibly talented, fit every role, and will go into interviews and say things like, there is no one better for this role than me. Like I'm the solution you've been waiting for. No one wants to work with that person, and they've been weeded out of every process. So to round this out,
don't be weird. Just please don't be weird. I just critically like maybe ask some folks.
Don't email the person after and critique the website of the company. That's been someone we were recruiting, we were placing was about to get an offer for a $250,000 base salary, and they emailed the CEO what they didn't like about his website, and the CEO said, "Offer pulled." So don't be a weird person. So the question many people are obviously asking is like, what happens afterwards? We'll excuse that we already talked about how you succeed. If you want to, if you do want to climb the ladder, you can make immense amounts of money as a partner with the profit sharing, with the high salaries. But the exits, that's what obviously we've kind of alluded to. Tony, you've had a really interesting career. Why don't you start? You exited BCG. You've kind of had a couple really fascinating roles. How do you prepare for the exits, and then how do you choose those?
I'd say you sort of exit sort of similar to the way you get in some of these cases, especially if you're kind of leveraging the veterans network. Your success at these firms is because of the people who you work with. You're consistent, you show up, you're sort of affiliated with a constellation. But people leave the firm over time, right? And they're members of your network. All of these firms do a great job of keeping alumni engaged. So you'll see many of the people who you worked with at various alumni events. For me, Capital One in the DC area is like a magnet for anyone who's worked at, in my case, BCG. It's full of former consultants across the board. I had some really phenomenal mentors, people who I worked with for a long time. Head over there, and I said, "Hey, look, that my mom passed away. The work is tough. Even when you're feeling great and life is good, the work is exponentially harder when your personal life is harder." And so I said, "Well, this gave me an opportunity to reevaluate like my relationship with work and the amount of time that I spend away from family and friends. So I want something different." And I think when the work stops being fun, when you really hate showing up to the coffee chat, or you don't want to fly for that recruiting trip, or the fact that they flew the entire aerospace and defense practice that I was a part of to the French Riviera for our annual meeting, and that didn't seem cool. Once those things start to wear off, it's time to reevaluate, right? And so I reached out to great friends and mentors, saw where they landed, asked for help. Um, they explained what was going on. They advocated on the inside for that, and it became a great opportunity. I've moved on multiple times from that role. I went to work for the former CEO of Google, Eric Schmidt. I got an opportunity I did that for about 3 years. Spent 2.5 years as a cabinet secretary working for Governor Moore. And then as of about 2 months ago, Wyatt, update for you. I went back to work for Eric Schmidt at one of his defense technology startups. And so in each of these settings, I've used my consulting skill set and have done my best to recruit former consultants because it's a great network.
Again, very nice little mention, just Eric Schmidt that you're working for, right? I think Kyle also somehow works for Eric Schmidt. So I'll throw it over to you, Kyle, as another one of Eric Schmidt's, employees.
I guess he'd be my shareholder. Well, I'm
Something like that.
Too, so
you're a shareholder too. He's your colleague.
Yeah, he's my work colleague. So Tony has like actual contact with Eric Schmidt. I have not. So I mean what he said is totally accurate. I think you are going to have a good understanding of your like trajectory at the firm, right? And if you're like things are going well, right? Like there should be like indications that like you're on a path to like, becoming like an assistant partner or director, which is essentially like a partner in waiting. And then you gotta like wait until like obviously you're building the case to make partner, but wait until the business gets big enough that they can add on another partner. So if you don't feel like your trajectory is like that, like I don't know if you want to be like a terminal director, or maybe you have like some arrangement where you're making good money and you provide like expertise to the firm, almost like a warrant officer or something. But anyway, yeah, it's just, you got to evaluate like your own personal trajectory and like how much pain are you willing to take? Because even the senior people at these companies work really hard. Like the partners actually, even though, and like obviously they're making like a crazy amount of money, but like they're always flying places at the last minute. They're not staying in luxury hotels. They're getting screwed with travel, and they've got to deal with the problems of the firm and do business development. And that's how they get evaluated by their peers. So, if like you don't want to do that and you want a more chill thing, or you just want to be able to like do multiple things at once, like, like work at a corporate job and like try to like start a business or something, you got that's the kind of trade-off you're making, because you're sure as hell not gonna be able to do it when you're a consultant. Like, especially once you have a family, there's just not enough hours in the day. So I mean, but like and like how I left, right? Very similar. It's almost kind of like MBA recruiting again. Like you start reaching out, seeing, what's going on, what do you know, what do you know, and like also like where you want to go too. Like I met a bunch of people in the tech industry while I was a consultant, and I was like, wow, that looks way better than the bullshit I'm putting up with, and they make more money. And you also have like you build things too. Something I think a lot we haven't talked about, being able to like build like products and sell services to people is fun, exciting. It's something that you can actually be proud of instead of, being a consultant, which is something you should be proud of, but like in a different way. It's probably the best way to put it.
Yeah, I had totally funny story. as an aside before I jump to Alex, one of my friends told me a few months ago that there was a giant kind of kerfuffle amongst the associates at he's at Bain, and one of their partners had to fly out with them, but he basically got told like 2 hours before, so all the first class seats had cleared. It was cross country, it was New York to the Bay, and the team was like, so the partner buys the seat, and it was like the Comfort Plus on Delta. It wasn't first class, and people were like, "Does one of us give up our seat?" Like,
Oh,
and
geez.
no one like basically everyone played chicken because they were also like, we don't want to be the like kiss ass that's like, hey partner, you can have my seat. And he's like, okay, well, thanks, kiss ass. So he said that the partner basically came and like kind of laughed about it, and he's like, it's fine, I'll jump in back, and jumped to the Comfort Plus and was like working back there, like elbows sprawled. Because he knew like I'm not gonna figure out which person. So anyway, like Kyle said, um it's not always glamorous. And I love that, Tony, you said when you know that the French Riviera no longer sounds fun, uh, maybe look to leave. So
Yeah. And I would
Yeah.
also, one thing I'd add to Kyle's point is what I learned, like when you become a project leader, it's definitely a 6 day a week job. And I realized for the partners who I was affiliated with, it was a 7 day a week job, no matter what.
Yeah.
And
Sure.
and that was just always the case. And that was the grind, and that's what they wanted, and that was the trade-off for them that made sense. And yeah, first year partner makes $1.5 million, and that was, 5 years ago. So, but yeah, it's a slog.
Alex, you're also in defense tech at a pretty
Mhm.
sweet company. How did the and that's not where you exited first. So maybe kind of talk about, yeah, where'd you go, and then what does McKinsey, what does consulting mean as you go forward? Do people care anymore, right? Is that a thing that
Yeah.
gets you job looks, and how does that matter down the line?
For sure. So I think just to kind of like level set the group, my intention was never to like make a career in consulting. Selfishly, like I wanted to go to McKinsey for the exit opportunities and just kind of the reputation of the firm. Certainly learned a tremendous amount, but I had no ambition of making partner. Think of like making partners like becoming like a brigade commander. Like there's just so many slots available. And it's just like there's a lot of um, you know, people that just don't make it. I think Tony alluded to just like how much are you willing to put up with before you're just like, hey, like I've had enough. But I had this was just about the 2 year mark was out when I was at McKinsey. I had an opportunity. I got hit up by a recruiter for aerospace startup called Supernal. So think like electric vertical takeoff aircraft. Um, Product manager role seemed really interesting. They liked my background, aviator, having worked, I did work on some advanced air mobility stuff at McKinsey. And then honestly, the comp was more than what an EM would make. So I figured that was pretty attractive. Like I'll take the comp and then some and work half as much as an EM. Seemed like a pretty attractive deal. But I would say like, the technology for the company that I worked at was not ready for the market. So very quickly realized, I wouldn't say I made a mistake, but just I needed to make an exit, and switched over to Onebrief. I don't know if my McKinsey background, well, actually, I think it did because they came up in the interview. I think just kind of like looking at my kind of like background, product manager, military vet, McKinsey, um, lent itself really well for the role that I'm working at now, which is like a senior technical engagement manager. So kind of like, yeah, but so it worked out well for me. What was the rest of the question? I feel like I lost track of the original question. Talking about
Yeah,
exits.
yeah, no, sorry, I asked a two-part deep question. Really, just as you go down the line, that I always tell people that like be careful what you do your first roll out of an MBA. It's one reason that I think that getting to a McKinsey, BCG, PwC, Deloitte is a good move, because your MBA half-life is actually a lot shorter than people think. And in 20 years, if you have had a crappy career and you've job hopped to 8 different jobs with no real promotions, and someone's like, but I went to HBS, like no one gives a shit, right? Everyone's going to say, yeah, but you know, uh, you your career has not done much. So question for you, McKinsey, what's kind of the half-life there? how much does that matter once how long does that signal last? And when you're obviously you're not interviewing for roles right now, but as you go forward, how has the McKinsey name, helped from Supernal to Onebrief, or should people kind of, realize that, hey, once you're gone from McKinsey, it's like, what have you done for me lately?
Yeah. I think like it certainly helped me for sure. But the longer it is, so if it's like you're probably gonna get your most, and this is purely like, subjective here, like, you're probably gonna get your most value a few years out, after like being a McKinsey alum, beyond like 5+ years, I think it does diminish a little bit. Like Wyatt, to your point, right? People want to see like what are the subsequent roles that you've kind of gotten into. Have you been promoted? Are you, increasing your scope and responsibility? If you're kind of staying stagnant, or like you said, jumping around to a bunch of different companies, like really short kind of stints, then it can be a little bit of a red flag for some employers. So yeah, the longer, out of it, I think there's some diminishing returns for sure.
I can add to
Great.
that. I think it's actually it's a longer shelf life than I think than like undergrad or MBA. One of the roles I did during my first stint working for Schmidt Futures was that I was our head of talent, and so I interviewed hundreds of people, and you see the sort of major consulting firms on somebody's resume. It really did stand out, and it was an instant signal of kind of the kind of problem solving skills that this person's going to be able to bring, and their ability to self-organize. You could sort of tell, if they've done a couple years at one of these firms, then okay, great, like they've picked it up. If it's just a matter of months at one of these firms, then that's a sort of a warning sign. But pretty far after a person has left those firms, it helps from a brand and signaling perspective.
Yeah, I would agree that I think it does have a longer shelf life. Somebody who's done hiring and reviewed resumes and also just like looks at like job recs. Like even in big tech, like there's a lot of job recs that say management or strategy consulting preferred, right? And if you don't have that as on your resume, you then have to bring something else to the table. Because it is like a mark of like, I mean, it seems silly, right? But it is a mark of like corporate quality. There's like this person has passed like a QC check of some magnitude, right? Like he's like Tony said, if it's you were there for like a few years, right? That's normal. That's what's expected, right? Like because people like to hire people that match their backgrounds or experiences or what they've been like recommended to do, on like whatever HR advisor has told them, or what they think the required skill set is, and that consulting skill set is like very transferable across industries. And I think Tony said this at the beginning of the call, or when he joined. He's like, he reaches for that skill set every day, and I would agree with that. I reach for that skill set every single day in almost every interaction I have in the private sector, of just knowing how to like essentially do like stakeholder management and like how to like structure and analyze problems and deliver results. So I think it does have a long half-life. I don't know anything else to add to that.
Yeah, I will say clients that we work for placing kind of, didn't matter, like they appreciate that. It's a signal. Now, that doesn't mean that it's a panacea. You cannot jump from McKinsey into, let's say, a home services company, right? A private equity ops role, and then 4 years later be like, I'd actually like to now go to Google and enter it maybe a similar role, or maybe at all, right? One thing that I think consulting does really well is allow you, especially as a vet, to decide what you want to do in the future rather than today. And to be totally honest, most vets have no clue. Even in an MBA program, even 2 years into an MBA program, most vets don't actually know what the civilian world looks like, and consulting, to I think lesser degree investment banking, but especially consulting, lets you kick the can down the road a little bit and
Yeah.
experiment.
Yeah, and some of the profiles you'll see, like go look at a lot of CEOs and stuff, or people who are in the C-suite or business leaders. You see like a common trend start to emerge. There's like they're an investment banker, or they're a consultant. Consultant actually seems to be more common than investment banker, just on like anecdotal evidence. So like, and then they like went into industry and like using the skills that they developed in consulting, they advanced their career to where they are now, right? And I mean, I met a guy at Google. And he was, I don't remember his name because it's been a couple years now, but he was a VP at Google, and he was a young guy, and he'd been an Air Force vet. And yeah, he had done, business school to one of the MBB roles and stayed there, got promoted like what would be considered like below zone or whatever, to associate partner, and then made the jump to like T-Mobile as like a VP there, and like got promoted to T-Mobile, and then made the jump to Google. And it's just like this very like that's just firing on all cylinders, and that can happen to you if you're good and you know how to play the game, right? So, and you're willing to make the sacrifice to do it.
Yeah. Well, hey, thank you to everyone. Any final thoughts? I'll go around first to you, Tony, then Alex, then Kyle, before we sign off.
Yeah, I'll sort of end where I started. I spent a lot of time in my previous role focused on veterans. My number one advice to them when they're coming out of the military is go get an MBA or go back to grad school, because it helps to kind of signal to the world, signal to employers what they should do with you. And then I think the advice that I have for somebody coming out of an MBA program is go to one of the consulting firms, because it's where your theoretical knowledge becomes practical, real world knowledge, and it'll equip you with skills and a network that will be part of your brand forever. So it is worth the multiple months. It's worth whatever money you would pay to Alex for support and making sure you can get through that interview process. And then realize that it's going to be a really, really grueling, tough ride. It's probably like Ranger School or other things, but it is very much worth the time that you're going to invest into it, and it'll pay dividends for the rest of your life.
Damn, Tony, you do not still work for them? That's a great sell. Like
I tell people to do all the time.
you've got me fired up, and I said I'd never go back again. Okay. I have a slightly different view. I mean, I agree with what Tony says. I do think it's never going to hurt you as long as you don't do something catastrophically stupid. I will say that it is my opinion, who's now spent a few years tech firm. Consulting is a great path and can kind of like escalate you to like corporate, hierarchy life fairly quickly. But it'll be harder to break into maybe more product specific or technical or engineering roles, which can be super interesting, pay a lot of money, and do very well in the job market. If you go to a consulting firm straight out of MBA and instead don't try to get into a different part of, like, say, like a tech company and start to develop like real functional expertise in a really lucrative industry that's going to be lucrative for the foreseeable future. And when I look at people who went straight to Google out of the MBA versus, where I started, it makes you wonder. You're like, they're doing some super cool stuff and they're probably getting paid pretty well for it, and I've seen people, who like, at other tech firms that, or other tech companies, who they'll go and, they're able to like position themselves pretty well to like exit to like maybe like a smaller growing company, still make quite a bit of money because they've built this like path of like success and functional expertise in a specific area. So it's something I think people should like think hard about, because if you're really interested in like a specific like industry, like it may make more sense to just go to that industry and you'll have a better idea or a better like knowledge of it, and you can build your career and you won't have as much of a hard time. But if you really want to try and like you're ready to put up with the pain and take some swings and want to like do corporate America, like is it in its most corporate Americanness, like, you know, go do consulting. That'll probably happen.
Yeah. Thank you to everyone. Obviously, like I said, I'm not a consultant. I never did consulting. Um, I did private equity operations, and yeah, the path is different, right? Very difficult for me to ever probably get into Google. But it's not the only path. So if you're sitting here and you're like, man, I don't want to do anything that these guys described, maybe not anything, because I do a lot of the same stuff, just for a board and a CEO rather than a partner. But if you're interested in other roles, like, you know, don't feel constrained. We have our investment banking webinar on Friday. You can find the link to register for that in the link on the Instagram page on Steerco's, or it's in yesterday's or 2 days ago's LinkedIn post. So if you're interested in banking and you want to do finance, FP&A, maybe break into private equity someday, if you're a very, very, very lucky person, come to that on Thursday and we'll talk about that some more. So thank you to everyone that's come, Tony, Alex, Kyle. You know, Kyle's obviously sit rep 6, so, you know, thanking ourselves here, but thank you to everyone, and have a great evening.
Have a great evening, everybody.
Folks.
Appreciate it.